Hi, we come now to Moral Law 10, which is about suffering. And this is also going to bring us full circle back to our discussion about the good. Is it true that all human beings suffer? Is this a universal? Can we find a universal moral law based upon suffering? I think we can. So let's talk about the origin of this moral law. We are born changeable. Is that true? Do you ever change your mind? Yes, we change all the time, right? We can change what we think about good and evil. We can change in our view of the good, and we often do. Suffering arises when we think we cannot possess what we believe is the good. Okay, so think about that. Have you ever suffered? And there's a difference between suffering and pain. Like, I could be in pain right now and not be suffering because I can interpret it in the right way. Remember the Stoic philosophers who were dealing with this question of suffering. It's going to come up in here. How do we deal with suffering? So pain and suffering are not necessarily the same thing. Suffering arises when we think we cannot possess what we believe to be the good. So, do you think something's keeping you from the good right now? Is it causing you suffering? Can anything keep you from the good? How about only you can keep you from seeking the good? Okay, let's look at the nature of this moral law. The good is not virtue. We've talked about this many times. It's not natural virtue. It's not moral virtue. It's not instrumental virtue. Virtue is a means to the good. Today I was on Facebook and I saw a friend posting about this famous person who seems to have like a very good life. And he was saying, this person's my same age and look at their life and their accomplishments and what have I done? And I thought, ooh, he's envying their virtue. That's not good. The person was failing to see their own virtue. I kind of wanted to point it out to them. All right, so virtue's not the good. Don't envy other people's virtue. Virtue is a means to the good. The good is not happiness, remember? So sometimes we invent the good for ourselves. Oh, the good is having this really great life and I don't have it, so now I'm sad and suffering because of it. Or the good is happiness and I'm really miserable right now, so now I'm going to become hopeless and fall into despair. That happens, right? Just think the good is not happiness. Happiness is the effect of possessing what we believe is the good. And sometimes we believe something is the good and we're wrong about that. And when that thing is taken away from us, we become sad. We start to suffer. Let's say you have your eyes on this really great job and you're waiting for an interview and the interview doesn't come. What happens? Do you despair? Is that job the good or is the job of virtue? So many things could happen to us, but they can't take the good away from us if we really have the good. So suffering is going to be a test of our view of the good. Suffering is going to happen often. It's going to test us. Suffering results from evil, either moral evil or natural evil. And we have to see that they're both a reality in our lives. Moral evil at root is an act contrary to our nature as rational beings. Remember, we talked about this in Moral Law 1. It is to neglect, avoid, resist, or deny reason in the face of what is clear about God. It is to put oneself in the place of God to determine good and evil. So, when we determine the good for ourselves, we're playing God, and when it turns out that wasn't the good, then we suffer for it. The inherent consequence of moral evil is spiritual death, meaninglessness, boredom, and guilt. We talked about this in Moral Law 1 as well. Socially, it's the death of relationships, the death of institutions, and the death of cultures. So if you think about your own life, have you had relationships break down? Can you look at the cause of that? Was it because these people in your life or you weren't seeking the good? Natural evil consists of toil, strife, old age, sickness, and death. Physical death. We talked about this in the past as well. Hard work without a lot of fruit. People problems, striving, old age, sickness, and death, which happens to everybody, remember? And this is not original in the creation. It's not inherent in moral evil, but it's imposed. We've talked about this. It's imposed because of moral evil. Natural evil at times is intensified to famine, war, and plague. And we talked about this. We're currently going through a time of plague, right? Sickness, intensified sickness, a national timeout. Natural evil is imposed by God upon humans, not as punishment, but as a callback to stop and think. And not just to stop and think, but to stop and think about our view of the good. Natural evil is the last and continuing callback from moral evil. It's also calling us out of a condition of self-deception. We like to think we're seeking the good. And self-justification. We come up with all kinds of excuses for what we're doing, what we're pursuing. And we need to be called out of that situation of denying reason, being deceived about it, and justifying our condition. And so natural evil serves to restrain, keeping us from going as far as we can. Remember, we have an 80-year time span, and in that 80 years, we have toil, strife, old age, sickness. And for some, that's all natural evil does, is restrain them from going as far as they can into moral evil. We also talked about how natural evil recalls a person, change your way, turn around, change your mind about the good. And then it causes us to continue. It removes moral evil by pressing us to keep going and pursuing the good. So natural evil has a merciful aspect to it, even though we tend to think it's against us. So, in a sense, it is about your perspective and it is about your interpretation, how you deal with suffering. Suffering is relative to your view of the good. Okay, so here is the law for Moral Law 10. We are not to be discontent in pursuing our own view of the good, but we're to be content in pursuing what is truly the good. So if we're discontent, it must be a symptom of something. If we're discontent, that means we don't really have the good. We're not really pursuing what is actually the good. We're making it up for ourselves, and it's not satisfying us. It's not based on our nature. You can think about what lots of people pursue as the good. It seems like today, a lot of people pursue money as the good. But remember, money is a means. It's not an end in itself. And we use money to buy goods, products, services, consume. And people consume a lot and they're still not satisfied. And so the stuff is not the good either. Remember, the stuff is virtue. It's a means. It's an instrumental means to the good. All right, so let's look at the applications we have listed here for this moral law. This moral law is opposed to the envy of others in their circumstances, abilities, and honors. Like I mentioned earlier, my friend was displaying a little bit of envy at this famous person who seemed to have it all. So envy. Envy is wanting what another has. And there are lots of stories about this. I think of Iago in Othello, the play by Shakespeare. He envied Othello's position and honors. He thought he deserved it. Notice it's opposed to stoicism as a hardening of oneself to avoid suffering, because suffering is seen as useless. So though there are some admirable things in stoicism, there's a stoic attitude we take sometimes where we just harden ourselves. We just say, toughen up, go through it, muscle through it. And we don't see suffering as a callback. We don't see suffering as a means to getting us to stop and think. Suffering as virtue. So Stoicism has that error. It hardens. It's You can either soften under suffering and learn, or you can harden yourself and not learn, go deeper into moral evil. This moral law is opposed to resentment, complaint, and bitterness under circumstances. And I think resentment, complaint, and bitterness is permeating our culture right now. This is sometimes at the heart of, a power struggle we see in society. The 1% versus the 99%. The privileged versus the underprivileged. There's a lot of resentment. So why? Because we're thinking those people, the 1%, they have the good life, and us 99% don't. Maybe neither group has the good life. And instead of resenting, we should say, why am I suffering? Is it because I have a false view of the good? And complaining and bitterness. This moral law is opposed to discouragement in hardships, in contrast to patience and perseverance in hope. So remember, there is reason to hope that good will overcome evil in our own life and in the world. There's reason for hope. So we shouldn't get discouraged when we have to undergo hardship. Hardship is necessary. It's necessary for us to learn. Remember dominion? We have to develop all the powers latent in the world and in ourselves. And usually that comes with hardship. So right now, when I'm making these videos, we are in a global pandemic. It's a hardship, right? But in those circumstances, we are being pressed to think through a lot of things. Like, first of all, how do we overcome this virus? So we're having to have dominion in the area of medicine. How do I deliver my courses to my students when I can't see them face to face? I'm having to have dominion in course content creation. And I have to tell you, there's been challenges along the way. Even today, I couldn't get the camera to work. It's an iPhone. It just wouldn't record. So I had to learn. You know what I did? I turned it off and turned it back on, and it worked. So I didn't get discouraged. I said, you know what? I'm going to be patient. I'm going to persevere, and I'm going to hope that I will be able to make this video today. There have been many technical difficulties along the way, and it's one of the reasons why I'm not projecting the outline to you. It's just become so difficult. Okay, I'll tell you the real secret. My computer's memory is full, and my memory stick broke. And so I can't back anything up. So if I record it right into the phone, I can upload it. So yeah, don't be discouraged. Patience, perseverance, hope. We can overcome hardships and trials. Okay, this moral law is opposed to the self-indulgence of hedonism to escape emptiness or to compensate for pain. So think about hedonism is self-indulgence. And it could come in large doses or little doses. Like, man, it was a really hard day today and I suffered a lot. I worked a lot. I deserve to eat this whole carton of ice cream. It'll just help my pain, right? That's hedonism. Drinking to numb your pain, taking drugs to numb your pain. Self-indulgence is not a way to deal with suffering. All right, this moral law is opposed to cynicism. This is something I have to fight against. Cynicism sees the reality of evil without seeing the reality of grace. So and the Cynics were philosophers that predate the Stoics and influenced the Stoics. The Cynics saw that there is a moral law, a moral reality, but nobody measures up to that law. And they were happy to go around and point that out to everybody. And they despaired. They were hopeless with regard to people ever being good. So we can see that. We can look around and see a lot of evil. But we have to recognize grace as well. And this is why it's necessary to have a view of mercy and God in the world. One of my favorite rock stars, Bono, once made a contrast between karma and grace. And he said, I'm glad karma's not true because we would always get what we deserve. That's what karma is. You get what you deserve. And he thought he didn't deserve anything good because maybe he was not a morally good person. But he was glad there's such a thing as grace because grace gives forgiveness. Grace is a gift of forgiveness. So that is where we can find hope, in grace. And that's where we can extend forgiveness to others and hope that they also can grow and change. Change and grow. All right, this moral law is opposed to fatalism. Fatalism is a resignation to evil, and it's seen as merely natural, and natural evil is going to happen. Blank happens, and that's it. No, natural evil, moral evil don't just happen. Natural evil is imposed to call human beings out of that condition of moral evil. It's a stop and think, and that's hopeful. So don't think of evil as just like stuff happens. No, it's suffering is a callback to stop and think, reevaluate your view of the good. And if you've gotten it wrong, you have a chance to get it right. You have to think critically, though. And I hope this video is making you think. You don't have to agree with me, but you do have to think. Okay, so here are the consequences, positive and negative. Negative and positive, really. For those who do not seek the good, suffering from natural evil is avoided as meaningless. Suffering is seen as sheer meaninglessness. But to those who seek the good, all things are seen as working together for the good. Even suffering, even moral evil works for the good. Moral evil deepens the good, and natural evil calls us to stop and think, and it also compels us to pursue the good. So suffering has a purpose. Suffering is not meaningless. And I hope that you will think about these things and let your suffering serve you well, because we are going to suffer. Is it going to cause you to harden, or is it going to cause you to pursue the good more? Okay, well, thank you for joining me, and we're coming close to the end of the semester. We've got a couple videos after this, so thank you, and I will see you in the next video.